But anyways, let's take a look at this video real quick. The law is finally caught up to every AAA game is in trouble. Let's see what this is all about. I'd be curious what Mr. Bellular News has to say about this real quick.
This is one of those things that can have true impact, so let me explain. What just happened is the European Union just rewrote the rules on premium currency in games. Of course, that's the home of Ubisoft, of CD Projekt, of DICE, of Remedy, and so many other companies. And make no mistake, the new rules that they have just laid out could change gaming utterly. Actually change the games that you play.
Mm-hmm.
So you know those bundles where you've got to buy more currency than the item that you want costs? Or perhaps the idea of limited time events, of no refunds and digital purchases. These are all being fought against by legislators. And when the EU takes action, it's a large enough block that it can reverberate around the world. And as evidence, how's that USB-C charger on our phone working out?
That's crazy.
There's a lot to talk about. Strap in. This one.
It was during the Iron Mouse collab. TLDR, due to her life being way more busy, due to being in an agency, she couldn't just randomly masturbate at random times of the day during peaks. She's bled due to masturbating too much. Mouse was shocked. I don't know if my friend has told me any details on it. He just told me it happens. It happens like, you know, because he has like high libido.
One could actually, honestly,
they're coming for the gacha games.
Oddly enough,
no more
you've got
gacha
EU
games,
legislation
chat.
to thank for the standardized phone charger situation, and for many, the ability to play ROMs on their iPhone. But now we seem to have EU legislation to thank for premium currency being threatened. So here's what went on. In September 2020.
Hold on. I'll do one better. Not my lollies. Anyways.
The EU
I'll do one better.
The Digital Fairness Act that was targeting all the practices online
that
make using digital services miserable.
What am I gonna do as a
lolicon?
lolicon?
Dark patterns in video games as one of the targets, and that's basically the gross manipulative.
You should do a waifu tier list, maybe.
And strong arm money out of people. Obviously, especially applying to people who are not yet adults. And this is fairly weighty because in the EU alone, games are obviously big business. Revenues have been going up in the EU. Online game spending in 2018 represented 74% of turnover coming from online revenue, and 83%.
Not my femboy SS tier power
it's
level.
all of those fun, dark patterns actually working and getting digital currency money out of people. But those dark patterns target the most vulnerable people the most. And there's no one more vulnerable in the eyes of the law than children. Children who spend an average of €31 a month on online games, according to data from Video Games Europe.
Right there, chat. Right there. That's this chart. You guys see this chart right here, chat? This is your average Genshin Impact user right here. This is all Genshin Impact right here. All of this right here, chat.
Well, that's actually went down from 2023. I guess that's good. Everyone's feeling a little bit of the economic pinch, but it's not stopped the EU from taking action to protect kids, basically, from predatory premium currency models. And in situations like this, there's often a great offender, right, that is held up as an example of something doing everything wrong. So you might wonder, is it an Activision game? Is it Ultimate Team from the EA football games? Maybe it was Roblox. No, today, it's a game about horses. It's called Star Stable. You've probably never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
If this all does turn out good, we'll have the horse girls to thank. This is Star Stable Online. It comes from a Swedish developer called Star Stable Entertainment, and it is the game that may have just rewritten rules and monetization in the EU. So yeah, thanks, horse girls. Now, it turns out that Star Stable just uses all of the premium currency tactics in the book, which makes it a pretty awesome example, right? Especially because it is targeted at a younger audience.
It all started because of ponies, chat. It started because of horses.
So in March 24, the Swedish Consumer Agency filed a complaint with the EU-wide Consumer Protection Cooperation Network. That's a mouthful. And that complaint alleged that Star Stable Entertainment were targeting
I've never heard about this game before,
that breached EU consumer regulations. Now, the findings
God.
corroborated much
Allergies.
of those allegations. They found that the game made direct appeals to children in their ads, that they were using pressuring techniques like FOMO, which is particularly despicable when it's not, on adults, and there was a lack of transparency on purchases and loads more things. I mean, here's an example of one that's particularly rough. They were responsible for influencers promoting the game to kids without any disclosure of the spending risk. So, in short, it's bloody well damning. Star Stable Entertainment now have a month to address complaints and propose solutions with their game, but what matters for our purposes today is the Consumer Protection Cooperation Network, we can just call the CPCN. They have laid out what they want. So I'll spell it out via an example. This is what should happen in the ideal world. You, dear gamer, want to buy yourself a new horse. You see that your new horse costs 300 star coins. The store tells you that's around £5, so it just lets you buy 300 coins exactly.
Okay.
You buy exactly what you need for the horse, rather than the current bundles that exist of 200 coins or 400 coins, meaning that you always have to buy with some wastage, which just ends up giving the company more money. So in short, no obfuscation bullshit, no weird tactics. And worst of all for these companies, this will have them bloody well shaking. You'd have to have a refund policy, both for the coins and the horse.
What?
And none of this would be pitched as a limited time event where you have got to get the thing right now. So that's an example then of how these policies should be applied, and each is indeed a massive win for consumers. But that would not matter if this amounted to nothing. You could look at all this and think, right, so some Swedish horse game has got a slap on the wrist. No, it's more than that. This seems to have backbone. So here's the big important bit. These solutions are the backbone of what the European Consumer Organization...
Is it playing double? So that basically is what it does. Okay. Got it.
Key principles for trustworthy gaming environments. And these could cause huge problems for anyone who is using premium currency. When I say this could shake the foundations of the game industry economy, I absolutely mean it. So these, which I'm going to spell out for you, are the minimum requirements for purchasing and using virtual currencies in the EU. And what's neat is the philosophy behind them. So the CPCN considers these premium currencies as an equivalent to the real money that is used to purchase them. And that for them means that they are just as worthy of legal scrutiny. So you can see how that is in a way a mindset shift that paves the way for actually treating these as they are. So just think about the last game that you played that had a premium currency in it. Whatever that game is, I want you to keep it in mind. And with that in your mind, I'm now going to go through the various different practices that this targets. So, prices for premium currency packs that are a little more than the available product. So you've got to buy extra coins, extra gems, whatever it may be. Obfuscation of how much currency is worth by always pairing currency with other items or multiple currency options. As an example, I think World of Warcraft may actually fall for that because it includes Trader's Tender in one of the new mount bundles. Another one, a complete lack of a refund option for making currency purchases or even for in-game items. So there would have to be a refund policy. That's something none of us are used to in these games.
Interesting.
Also, FOMO practices to encourage buying. Those are going to be looked at, so some of those may no longer be allowed. And all of these practices are now something that the EU can hold against developers and publishers, even more so if the parental controls of said game are not up to scratch. So it's less a case of me saying, can you think of any game that falls into those categories? And it's more me saying, can you think of a game that doesn't fall into those criteria? It's fairly humongous, which might indeed be the point here. We know this is something the EU have been thinking about in other circumstances than just Star Stable. As an example, in September 2024, the European Consumer Organization published a report on popular online games. And in that report, they targeted Diablo 4, EA Sports FC 24, Minecraft, Fortnite, and a bunch of others. And it was all about how the virtual currencies work. They were not thrilled on what they found in those.
Minecraft has virtual currency? Since when? I don't remember that. I remember EA and like Activision and Fortnite. I don't remember Minecraft having something like that.
those games, right? Because many of them, well, they did the same things that Star
Bedrock.
Stable did
I
that
see.
we do not like. And that straight up means we can say that Electronic Arts and Blizzard Entertainment are being directly
I just play
targeted by
modded
this
Minecraft.
body. That really
That's
is
about
something.
it,
So it's no
you know?
wonder that the BEUC will be holding workshops to help European companies implement these new principles. It
Really?
seems they may actually have to implement them. Everything that they previously thought was acceptable pretty much now isn't. And that, here's the shocking thing, that's not my commentary.
I
That
see.
is what the industry
job
response
edition,
has
that's why.
been. So we know they are shaking in their boots.
I don't have
It ain't
Bedrock.
surprising the industry bodies aren't thrilled about this, and a big shout out to one of our Belgrade Games members, Neo Nebulosa, for directing us to this stuff. So the European Game Developers Federation and the Video Games Europe, or two groups basically, they've published a joint statement that expresses their disappointment with the findings. Let's read their statement.
Oh, let's
Quote,
see.
"We are disappointed by the lack of engagement from the CPC network in creating these principles, which introduce new legal theories and misguided interpretations of EU consumer law that will create confusion and disruption for European customers." Sidebar. Oh no, we're going to be disrupted by sort of annoying predatory stuff going away. What an awful disruption. Back to the statement. It will also present a challenge to the industry's future growth and could even deprive millions of consumers access to their favorite games.
Not the
Now, that
waifus.
last bit is the interesting thing.
Not
So,
the waifus.
understandably, right? These groups, representing the most powerful players in the industry, did quite like things the way that they were. Change is dangerous, especially to the bottom line, and especially change like this. But in a way, they're not inherently wrong. It is true that audiences do actually understand premium currencies by and large right now, and when implementing currencies, these companies were following, their best legal guidance, and now that guidance has changed. I guess just like how so many phones had like a bespoke charging cable until the rules just changed in the middle of the game. So now they've got to get used to these new rules. And what'll sting is the impact on their
Oh yeah, my mom was confused or so that like her iPhone accepts Type-C ports instead of the normal iPhone thing. She was so confused.
their bottom line. They're not wrong about the potential impacts of all of this. Now, big companies like Ubisoft can probably absorb the costs of any legal challenges or damage from rebuilding their premium currency systems. They'll probably spend a whole lot to try and figure out ways around these principles. As for
Probably.
smaller
I wouldn't be
companies, well, they
surprised.
may not find that so easy. But where things will be dramatic is the group's final warning, because it's the most threatening one. It's the idea that players in the EU may just
True. I don't really know if Ubisoft can still do it. Do they even still have any money left or so to actually,
be locked out of video games. They'd say with a game like Overwatch, right? That they would simply choose to geo-restrict access to the game rather than change their monetization
Really?
model, or to just continue the game as normal and risk EU lawsuits. It could just be they look at the EU and think, you know what, we make enough from the States and other countries, we really don't need them. That being said, the EU population is kinda huge. Overall GDP is obviously a very, very flawed metric, but as an example, right, just Googling this here in 2024, the EU's nominal GDP was about 17.9 trillion and 1/6 of global nominal GDP, which is quite a lot of money, and a hell of a lot of that GDP globally will be in other countries like, say, China, where a lot of these companies will not be
it's okay. It's Overwatch, but you want to know the difference? You want to know why I can tell, right? The girls. That's about it.
to go in and directly monetize. That could actually mean that they will feel the need to change. And in a way, there are two wolves inside me who are fighting, right? I suppose one of them is the pragmatic wolf. The other one is the almost like the last vestiges of some sort of libertarian idealism that says, let the market decide. If the gamers do not like the bad practices, the gamers shall not partake in them.
Ubisoft gave up on making games now, LOL. News dropped that they partnered with Tencent and to become an IP holding company. Think Disney, and they'll license out IPs to other studios to make games/medias for, and they collect a fee. Oh, I see.
And the market will solve the problem. And I wish that was true, but I feel there's almost a faux idealism in so much of that, because these psychological hooks, these psychological triggers, they do actually work. We're in a world where you can very easily make, I think, some sound enough, philosophical arguments very much against regulation and all of that. And I totally get that. I'm fairly sympathetic towards that in many cases. But the thing is, we've also got to be pragmatic. And a part of that is being a bit humble about the human condition. And the fact of the matter is, these practices are not popular.
True.
People do not like them. Yet, people's behavior does continue. And these obviously are bad. And as people who enjoy video games, we see that as these types of practices derive more and more revenue, they then become what the companies focus on. And that is worse for the actual video games. Because I suppose in a way, how much of game industry revenue comes essentially from psychological manipulation and these various business strategies that are designed to rake in revenue in a way that's not really tied to the experience of a game that you purchase.
It's a lot of people, these companies like to take advantage or so of those people who are I guess you can say they're kind of mentally ill or so, where they just take advantage of them from the, doing these weird, I see what they're trying to do or so with this specifically. It's a addiction like any other. My community calls them yeah, there we go, dopamine chasers. Yeah, exactly. I couldn't remember the word specifically. People with poor impulse controls. Yeah, for me specifically, unless I really, 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 really like the character, right? The only character I have ever done that where I've dropped $100 on a character was Zhongli. That was it. That was literally the last character I ever dropped $100 on. But that was just only $100. And because, it's not like I threw fucking $600 on fucking Farina. I'm just saying, it's not like I'm like that person who dropped 600 donos or so on a C6 Farina.
We've just seen the share of that increase and increase and increase. And it's no wonder that as that is increased, the rest of us have become less and less satisfied with games.
True.
So in a way,
And the funny thing about it too as well? I still use them even to this day. During the time where those Rift Hounds or so in Genshin Impact that were supposed to be the counter to Zhongli. You want to know something? You know what I just did? I just dodged. That's it. Joke's on you. I dropped 500 for C6 Zhongli. Oh god.
The waifu was worth the $600. Do not make fun of it. She is real to me.
Yo, I will make fun of that person who dropped $600 on fucking C6 Farina, alright? Nahida for me dropped 100 because I really want an Archon. Yeah, an Archon. Archons are usually the ones I usually go for the most. $5 for Kokomi on her first banner. Yeah, I got Kokomi too as well.
This does hurt the revenue of a bunch of companies and unfortunately leads to a bunch of job losses because these types of practices are
they ruin
no
their marriage
viable.
on top of that.
Good riddance. Good riddance, absolutely. Let the companies fail, let those jobs go down. How we run things should be a dialogue between the private and public sectors, and in a case like this, I think it's an example of the public sector, right? The people essentially saying, we actually do not like this practice. We don't want this to be the rules of the game. We want the rules of the game to change, to be more robust. And the market will, once it adapts to that, find a solution. And if the new rule set is a better rule set, then that should be a net good. But of course, none of this will matter if there's no enforcement. Because one country making a digital consumer policy often will find difficulty in enforcing it because you're just one little guy, Mr. Belgium, right? That's why even though Belgium has banned loot boxes, so many games simply just ignore that and still operate in the country. Like in World of Warcraft in the new raid, one of the bosses is basically
I just dropped $150 for V3 Klukai and her weapon. Lost 3 and 50/50ths S, had about a month's worth of saved cubes.
I see. But fish keeping is much more of a drug for me. I haven't pulled for years on Fate Grand Order to save for a new Medusa in a few months.
We always have the joke that for the person in our team that's in Belgium, that boss just can't drop any loot. I don't know, there's an EU firewall or a Belgian firewall. That's a joke, but you get the point. As much as many people have kind of went, oh, Belgium, you, take him down. It hasn't really mattered because it's just Belgium, just one little guy. It's a bit different here, though. And that's because the EU is, 26 other countries.
It's massive, yeah.
And also Belgium. In 2023, it was worth 25.7 billion euro in game revenues. That's a lot of revenues. And we know that their legislators are willing to take on the likes of Apple and Google when their rulings are being defied. They have done that. But more than that, the companies inside the EU are, part of a big global network, and that does mean that whenever USB-C cables become standardized in the EU, they then become standardized everywhere because of manufacturing limitations. I'm sure Apple would have loved to have continued just selling people Lightning adapters in the States, but ultimately they seem to have saw the way the wind was blowing and made the big change to USB-C. No one wanted to have, of course, a whole factory just making EU-only phones. And again, thinking about the impact that would have had on the whole ecosystem of manufacturing partners, blah, blah, blah. So you can see how with hardware, it does kind of make sense. We can see those software examples where it's not really the same thing. It's not like you can just go and get an emulator for your iPhone in America, but you can in the EU. So the question then is, will developers want to risk losing a large slice of that EU-derived money?
No.
Or will they simply have to ship a cut-down and less exploitative version of their in-game monetization to European countries? If so, it puts them in a fun little dilemma where the American gamer may get a transparently worse deal than, say, the European gamer.
Yeah, but I didn't, well, for me, because I'm an adult and whatnot, right? I just don't buy anything, to be honest. Like stuff from Overwatch, right? Stuff from Overwatch, and like maybe I spent like what? I think I spent like $20 or something like that on Marvel Rivals, or $15 or so on a skin, and that's pretty much about it. The game was good, I had a good time, so I gave him $15,
And then you can say, well, compare your store to mine. My one is a bit more respectful, doesn't have as much FOMO, doesn't have as many tricksy bundles.
I don't think Bell gets into this aspect, but I'll make an addendum. This change, of made by the EU, will also reach to the States. Think about this. If an EU citizen plays on an NA server without those rules, are they still subject to EU laws? Absolutely, and that's a terrifying change for them.
I see. All this shit needs to be regulated. It's long overdue because they keep fucking around. They need to find out. Yeah, no. In my personal opinion, they do need to, they do need to regulate it, because there's a lot of people that are getting exploited by these kind of mental tactics and gymnastics to kind of bait the people to spend money. But since for me, right, I'm pretty good at managing my money, or so, like handling money, make sure to save, break apart, whatever I earn or so, break it apart. I'd be like, this goes into savings, this goes into spending, and then this extra stuff will be, whatever that I want to buy, like a video game, or a skin or something, or whatever, or a DLC for a video game or something like that. Then, it's kind of like, yeah, it's just, it is what it is.
Basically feel like a scam, and that'll be a bad look. That's the dilemma that these companies face, and in a way, it's all thanks to a game about horses.
The funny thing about it, I can't even trick myself when I know I am broke.
So, hero of the day? Horse girls. I guess that's a thing. Okay, tell you what though, if you want another story, another big, grand, juicy story, check out this one. It also hits the EU, but it also hits corporate melodrama.
But Dubstep, the problem is with that, right? The parents should never, why would they ever have their card connected to, their child's, iPad or whatever other shit to...
That's like gaslighting yourself, but you forgot to pay the gas bill, LMAO.
We don't pay gas over here. We pay electric, at least where we live anyways. But yeah. But at the end of the day, the families, the mom and the dad should know, they should be looking at their bank account almost like every single day at least to see, their expenditures and everything. They're also, you know, the parents are also to be blamed to some degree specifically about it. So yeah, but there are moments or so that a kid will, you know, will spend, you know, lots of money or so. I think if I remember correctly, there was someone who spent a shit ton of money or so somewhere in the Asian territory on, I think on a Zhongli banner. I think they spent like over like $20,000 or something like that. And then like the family's in distraught or so because of it. Because I think it was their daughter. Their daughter. I don't remember the type of currency or of it. But that's what happened. Let me see. Hold on. Let's see. Asian daughter. Dad settled a 20,000 credit card bill after daughter was spending in-game spending spree in Genshin Impact. There you go. It was during the if I remember correctly, it was during the Zhongli thing, if I remember correctly, but I don't remember if it was. But yeah, upgrading characters. Okay, never mind. So she was upgrading a character, 20,000 credit card on a credit card. So yeah. But yeah. No, they just kept swiping. That's about it, you know? So, let's see, 1 year worth of school fees. So I told her off that she said that it was a lot of money. 1 year worth of school fees. It was her to go overseas university. She just spent a huge sum without blinking an eye, he added. In-game, characters can progress faster with items upgrades bought with real money. His daughter would reportedly spend up to $300 for randomized items. Lim was able to recover $10,000 from the bank where he got his credit card. He said he hopes companies will review the online transactions when their children are involved. No, this should definitely be you. So, but we as parents have totally no control. Lim said it is a disaster waiting to happen. Want to make sure more parents are aware of it. What do you mean you have no control? That's your daughter. How did she manage to get your credit card, you know? That's the question to ask, you know? But yeah, but at the end of the day, you know, I'm upgrading my belt. But yeah, at the end of the day, you know, that's, you know, you should always keep in mind or so of what you should never, number one, you should never hook up your credit card to an iPad and then give it to your child or so, you know? Because you don't know what the fuck is going to happen. That's number one, okay? But yeah, at the end of the day, they should probably regulate these things. Honestly, in my personal opinion, I was never a huge fan of these kind of like microtransactions in AAA games, you know? Do you guys remember the loot box craze during the Shadow of what is it? Shadow Mordor or whatever it's called? Whatever the fuck that one game was called from WB, you know? I got mindset of they text me a code to confirm the payment. Same. Shadow War, yeah. Remember the whole loot box craze during that time or so? Yeah, it's just like stuff like this. You know, stuff like this is just not really necessarily needs to be in AAA games whatsoever. I think the situation was she was studying overseas, but instead of giving her a fixed amount of some sort of financial plan, they literally just gave her a credit card with no strings attached. See, that's the problem. That's the problem right there, you know? That is the problem, so. But yeah, anyways. It's gonna be very interesting to see what's happening. I can't wait to see the ripple effect. You know, I assume it has not, specifically this video. Can you guys tell me, chat, has this gone through yet, or is it still being in the works right now? If it's still being on the works, I'll be very curious to see how it's gonna affect the gaming landscape, at least, you know. Like I said, I'm curious. I'm very curious indeed. We'll see what happens, you know. Anyways, that's the end of the video. You guys can comment, like, subscribe, do all that fancy jazzy stuff, and yeah. So it's about 3 weeks old. 3 weeks old, but from what I've learned, so this is 3 weeks. Okay, so this was 3 weeks ago. Okay, I see. I thought this was just recently. Oh, 15 hours ago, actually. So, okay, so that means it's still being in the works then, if that's true. So, well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens for this shit. So, anyways, that's the end of the video. Anyone can leave me a comment or so, talking about this. People from EU can tell me a little bit more. I like reading the comment sections at the end of the day. So, give me a little bit more information, at least. Thank you, YouTube comments. And yeah, that's the end of the video. And a peace.